Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. It's great to be here today.
We're here today with Lou of A.G. Miller. A.G. Miller is a full-service sheet metal contract manufacturer.
Correct.
Cut, bend, weld, powder coat, paint.
Correct.
Anything you need.
Silk screen, plating.
Long-run orders, short-run orders, a bunch of different ones. And you're here in Springfield, Massachusetts, about half an hour north of Hartford?
Yes.
Something like that.
Yep, just slightly to the east as well.
Well, thanks for spending some time with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
You come to sheet metal from manufacturing, but outside of sheet metal. Would love to hear the story. How did you get into this business?
Sure. So kind of a long story. I graduated college in 1990, kind of dating myself a little bit, but graduated with a business degree, needed a job, was in the Navy for a short period of time, was fortunate enough to get picked up by a division of Emerson Electric, and went through their training program and came to the conclusion that I really enjoy being around mechanical things, whether it's a gearbox, a bearing. I really had a wonderful learning experience with that company and was able to progress, and was always close to machinery. And whether it was some kind of a fabrication or something that was being turned, I always found it really fascinating. So having worked for them for a number of years, a colleague and I decided to kind of branch out from the corporate world, and we purchased a small sheet metal company in upstate New York, which is still going today. And that company is called Stonewell Bodies, and we manufacture, by virtue of sheet metal, truck bodies and trailers. And we've been doing that almost 16 years now. But, again, having an affinity for the industry, while on vacation one day at my brother-in-law's house in South Carolina, I was with my family, and I was just, checking out emails, got a spam email about, hey, there's this business for sale, and clicked on the link. 2 days later, I had a signed NDA, and the following week was visiting the company. Mr. Rick Miller, who was second generation at A.G. Miller. Had an opportunity to meet with him and meet some of the staff and learn a little bit about the business. And I just, again, find the sheet metal work very fascinating, and the diversity of customers and the diversity of applications, just personally kind of gratifying, right? So from there, had an opportunity to discuss it with my family. About 7 months later, ended up buying the company, and have had the opportunity to work with a lot of the same employees that were here, that are legacy employees. And we continue to try to grow and innovate and invest in the business and try to solve customer problems. So I just find the work is interesting. There's a bit of the design and engineering that is fun for me. There's also the sales and operations side of it, which I find very interesting. So it was just, the industry is just kind of a natural fit for what I like, right? So had an opportunity to do this and continue with the other business, and having a good time doing it.
So going from Emerson to a small sheet metal shop, quit your job right away?
Scary as hell, yeah.
What were the biggest differences? Obviously, there's many, but what were the biggest operating differences that maybe your intuition that you learned at Emerson didn't serve you well, and what things were actually really valuable in taking over that business?
Fortunately for me personally, I had an opportunity to work with some really great guys, all very supportive throughout my career. So I had a chance to see business cycles, the good, the bad, deal with people on a relatively limited basis. But the thing that struck me the most was, as being a partner, was the amount of interaction that we would have with the actual fabricators, people that were building stuff. And it's, sheet metal to a certain extent is a lot of hands-on. There's a lot of subjectivity in some of the things that we do. So there's always this surprise aspect of, it's not just the machines, right? It's really the people that operate the machines and that do the work, and the folks that inspect it and try to take out some of the subjectivity and work to a specific design. But one of my biggest surprises coming into the business was just the amount of day-to-day interaction with people of all different backgrounds, all different socioeconomic levels, and just have a just a decent perspective of what they go through in trying to get the product that the customer needs out the door, to our quality standards, on time, within budget. So that was an aspect that I hadn't been exposed to quite as much. So kind of going from a little bit more of a coat and tie environment to, getting your hands dirty and just being on the phone all the time and talking to customers, and it's just a whole different level of learning, right? You're right down in the weeds with the people at all different levels, and not so much just looking at spreadsheets and managing from afar. So,
what did that adaptation process feel like?
My background was in sales and marketing, so I'd always been around people and talked to primarily customers. So it was somewhat challenging, a little different. You can't just, as an employer, demand that something takes place and it magically takes place. You have to be empathetic with the people, and it was a bit of a learning curve. But again, I think if you come from a background where you respect people regardless of what they do, how they were brought up, whatever the case may be, and you have that mutual respect with the people that you work with, generally it's going to be a pretty easy transition and a successful transition. There are always going to be people that you don't see eye to eye with. And the best thing that you can do is figure out how to adapt, or find an intermediary that's going to be, happy to help and bridge that gap. So it's really, Sonny, that interaction with people on the grassroots level was the biggest surprise for me, biggest change.
What were the things where, the discipline that you gained from your previous life helped the most?
Budgeting, spending, trying to do as much data analysis as possible. Those are all things that were, really kind of ingrained in us. But it's different, right? So when you're in a small shop, you're only going to collect so much data. You're only going to be able to glean so much from your efficiency, or what you thought you could get done versus what you actually got done, and try to measure that. So, I think one of the beautiful things about the reason we're here together and talking about Fulcrum is trying to bridge that gap and create that data analysis, that data set, which for a lot of small shops doesn't exist. So finding out what you can measure and measuring it, and then finding out what's important to you and to your business, and figuring out a way to measure it is really important. Along with the measurement is knowing your numbers, the financials. Again, when you work for a big company, you have an idea of what the financials are. You have an idea of your revenue, your bookings, your operating profit. It's all published, right? So smaller companies, just making sure that you understand where you are financially, and having someone, if it's not you personally, having someone who is very strong on the financial side of stuff. Could just be a basic bookkeeper, an accountant, somebody that you trust. That trust factor is really, really important.
So gathering that information, compiling it, analyzing it is a challenge, but it's also a challenge of consumption, to get people to look at it and use it and make decisions from it. Like, how do you handle that? Like, how do you take a culture that doesn't consume data and get it to consume data?
Gradually. I find that the more we try to rush or quickly incorporate new things, in some cultures that might be fine and it's accepted. In some other cultures, like the cultures that I work in, it takes a little bit more time and energy and patience because, we don't have a lot of time to waste. So if something is working and you want to interject a new system, a new process, the biggest question is, well, why am I doing this? And what's going to be the tangible output of this new process? And so for a lot of folks, they won't see it, even though you try to explain it and you try to quantify it, they won't see it. So trying to get people to understand the change process and the ultimate goal for that process, it's a full-time selling job. So you can't just create an edict and it happens. I mean, I'm sure some industries, some businesses can. In a smaller, more of a family shop, it's a little bit harder. So it takes some time, takes some coaching, takes a general commitment from the owner, from the management, to want to implement that change and make it happen. It's usually pretty good. right? But, owners, managers at times make mistakes. And if you listen to the people on the shop floor as you're trying to deploy something, generally there's going to be some good outcomes because you don't know everything. You don't know everything that you thought you knew. So I would say that taking time and deploying some new technology and getting buy-in at the very beginning is really, it's important. It's very important to make that happen.
One of my first bosses told me you can't push a rope. You gotta bring people along. But at what point in time do you have to make the call that says you've invested enough time in somebody, and if you're going to make a change happen, it might not happen with them, even if they've been there for a long time?
So I think that is very much a case by case situation, right? So valuing the ultimate goal and the value of the strategy versus an individual, I think only an operator can determine, when it's time to cut bait. But there certainly are instances when you can't get buy-in, even though you've thought you had buy-in. Someone is just kind of stringing the process along. Very much case by case, but I had to do that. And, in retrospect, was it a good decision? I think it was, in the long term. But again, we're very much task oriented. We've got to get X out the door to get X revenue in. And that kind of goes back to the patience and trying to figure out, is the person savable? Did I do enough training? Did I generate the value proposition so that they had an opportunity to really buy in? But ultimately, if somebody's really counterculture, you got to kind of suck up the good with the bad. And that bad may be short-term loss of data, short-term loss of know-how, short-term loss of camaraderie in the shop with other people. It's things that you can't quantify. So, yeah, again, coming from a big company culture where you think that people are replaceable doesn't work in a small business because no one's really super replaceable. Everyone's got some amount of tribal knowledge that you have to try to keep within the tribe. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's a real pain.
So you go through the pain and toil of figuring out how to scale a business, and then 16 years later, 15 years later, however long later, decide to buy another one. You said it happened in a really short amount of time. Yep. Was it the right time for you? Were you already thinking about it? Was it at a point in time where this other business was kind of figured out, if you will, and fixed and refurbished, or however you want to describe it?
So you're talking about,
about A.G. Miller, about buying A.G. Miller.
Well, A.G. Miller started in 1914, right? So it had been around, or continues to be around, for a very long period of time. It had some very mature clients, some up and coming clients that were of great interest. So, is the timing right? I guess it depends on if you're in it for the long haul or not. If you're trying to flip something, then timing is really, really important. If in the case of this business, there are legacy customers who are first and foremost great people that you want to hang around with, people that will give you every opportunity to be successful. You look at that customer base and you have to value it as kind of the impetus for making the switch, right? Buying another company. In the case of A.G. Miller, that customer base was there. So I looked at it as, hey, some of the stuff, some of the building aspects may be a little old, but it's a business with great bones. So, if we could kind of flesh it in a little bit more and grow it, that customer base exists. So I'll tell you this, and I've told my family this, I've told friends this, buying a business is easy, right? A lot of people can buy a business. Trying to operate it, trying to grow it, trying to nurture it, especially in the first year, is really hard. It's tough, especially when there's not a lot of data to be shared, right? So it's hard.
One of the hard parts, though, of buying a business is valuing it. Oftentimes there's a gap between what, someone who, like you said, is second, third generation business owner, you can have a value of a business that might not actually be rational from a financial perspective. Did you have that difficulty? Was there a tough value conversation?
Yes. So in my life, I've had an opportunity to be in and around the acquisition of 3 companies. One very, very big that was not mine. I was part of the deal. One that was relatively small which was when my business partner and I decided to buy Stonewall Bodies. And then this one, as well as one other company that we had made offers for, but never acquired. So yeah, the valuation is kind of tough, right? Because obviously we can value the real estate, we can value the equipment to a certain extent. You can value the consistency of the profit stream that it generates. But if you're buying from a family member or a sole proprietor, there's a lot of emotion that goes into it, and look at all the hard work that I've put into this, but at the end of the day, whether it's an earnings multiple or an asset buy, you're only going to get so much for that goodwill, that intangible. So fortunately, in my case, I think we were able to paint a picture with the current owner of how we came up with the valuation, and we were very close to begin with. So, no surprises. I don't feel like I overpaid, and I don't think he feels like he undersold. So there's a human element when you're trying to do a transaction in a small business, right? I think that if the prior owner, Rick Miller, and I didn't like each other as people, I would have never bought the business. I don't think he would have sold it to me. So there's this whole human element in the business transaction. Same with the staff. So like when the LOI was signed and we were talking about the transitional period, I had an opportunity to come in and meet with, some of the top managers. And I think if the vibe wasn't right, I would have probably walked away. And I think the same for Rick. I think if Rick had sensed that there wasn't good chemistry between me, the potential new owner, and the existing people who he absolutely loved and treated as family, if that just wasn't right, and my mindset was, I'm going to come in and clean house, I think Rick, being very loyal to his team, would have not sold the company to me as well. So yeah, there's a lot of non-quantifiable evaluation that goes on in the transaction, especially into the, leading up to the LOI phase and right even up until closing. So, we had great chemistry with the people that were here. Some have since retired and I've had to backfill. So again, it kind of, it boils down to trying to operate a business, a small business. It's about the people. It's about the guys that are running it.
So just to clarify, an LOI is a letter of intent.
Yes.
When you issue one, is it binding? Is it essentially the same as actually getting an offer? Like for a lot of people, they've never received one and don't know how to think about it. Like as a party that wrote one and gave it to somebody, how did you feel about that point in the transaction?
Well, again, I wrote it with a great deal of sincerity, saying that, I have every intent to follow through with this transaction based on what I've spelled out in this letter of intent, price, terms, and the ability to close it. So again, the letter of intent is really just that. If you're sincere in it, you intend to continue down the path of a due diligence process, which should lead you to a conclusion. And if all of the, let's call it the pre-due diligence, the selling data that's been presented that you should have requested, if none of that is really found to be contrary to what you had expected, then you should be able to close on the agreement. So are there
other things that you would have seen that would have caused you to walk away?
Obviously, there's the unknown of the environmental in a manufacturing shop. That's always present. Whether I'm going to do a phase 1 environmental, we had to do a phase 2 at this place simply because of its proximity to a facility that does a lot of industrial coatings. There were some actions that the prior owner had to take, which at any point in time could have killed the deal. Because obviously if we don't get a clean bill of health from the EPA, anytime there's bank financing involved or SBA financing, those things will trip up a deal, regardless of how bad the buyer and the seller want to close the deal. So I think you had asked me about the letter of intent, and having issued a couple of them, it goes back to that relationship between the seller and the buyer and the sincerity involved in the creation of the LOI. And that should nothing come up in due diligence, you should be able to close that deal.
After you buy the business, is there at some point in time it feels like yours? Is it like a ship of Theseus where it maintains its own identity? Is it still the same as it was before? Like, how does that feel from your perspective?
So I think that in a long-term, long-lived businesses like these, I think we're just stewards of them, right? So obviously we have the ability to resell it, close it, to do all the things that you would think you're, entitled to do. But at the end of the day, when you have a customer base that relies on you, I mean, what does the term owner really mean, right? Like, okay, so you can do things that you may think are irrational, but at the end of the day, we are stewards of these businesses. If we're going to, at some point in time, retire from them, hand them down to our family members, our children, sell them. There's a point in time where I think you feel comfortable in it, but the sense, and I'm speaking just for myself,
sure,
right? The sense of ownership, no, not really. Like, I know I own a boat, I own a car, right? I'm cool with that. But the fact that someone would introduce me to an employee or to a customer as the owner, I look at myself as the chief sales guy, right? So, no, I don't feel like, again, speaking for me only, that there's ever going to be a day where I'm like, I own this place, and because I own it, things should be great or things should be done this way. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just don't have a big enough ego to ever say that ownership really means anything other than you've got some debt, you've got some customers you got to take care of. We've got vendors that we have to take care of. Having a great vendor base is a luxury. So no, the term ownership doesn't really mean much to me personally. It's more stewardship that's important to me.
Not to bring you into a tech world beef, but there's two schools of thought in our world. Our school of thought, which is we're writing software to support businesses like yours.
Yep.
There's another school of thought, which is you guys don't know what you're doing, and all these tech companies are going to get a bunch of investment, build their own machine shops, their own sheet metal fabricators, write their own software. And you said something interesting earlier, that there's always some tribal knowledge that actually is extremely important to servicing these long-term relationships, these products that are really important, whether that's things that support our energy grid or support our safety as a country or support other infrastructure or even just fun recreational things. How do you think about that? Having both the perspective of being an outsider looking in and also being an insider operating a business, do you think that there's something special about an entity like A.G. Miller and their ability and your ability to build stuff and know how to do certain things, or do you think that something technology can usurp that as well?
So that's a really interesting question, okay? Because I think I can answer it in a couple different ways. As it relates to the tribal knowledge aspect and providing a part that your customer is going to accept becomes a function of relationships and understanding what that customer's true intent is when they receive that product. So they may call out something on a drawing that is somewhat ambiguous, but you've built it for them for years, so you know that it's going to work. And guess what? For years, that part has been accepted unconditionally, no issue. So we're at an inflection point with, some younger people coming into these industries and younger engineers, younger quality folks. And the part doesn't meet the print. It just doesn't meet the print. But we know that it's always worked. It's always fit. It's always been unquestioned. So part of that tribal knowledge has to be balanced with, in these days, does it meet the print? And I think that our ability to satisfy the customer's needs and satisfy the documents that are given to us that pertain to the form fit of that part, they have to all come into play, because the guy that let that part at some point in time for 20 years always work, the next day when his replacement or her replacement comes in, it may not meet the print. Therefore, all that tribal knowledge and all that legacy acceptance goes out the window.
Yeah.
So now we have to talk about technology, and are we able to manufacture the part to that print in a cost-effective way, or
should you?
Or period.
Or should you? Maybe that print needed to change and it didn't.
Excellent point. Yeah. And again, that goes back to having the relationship with your customer that says, look, if I build it exactly the way it's drawn, it may not work. So should we have a conversation and talk about updating the drawing? Are you open to doing that? Or, this is my position as the manufacturer. This is what I can and can't do as it relates to that drawing. So it comes back to having a conversation with your customer, and to a certain extent, even the operators that are building those components, to say, hey, look, we've always done it this way. We can't do it this way anymore. And having acceptance and having the right equipment and the machinery to do that. So some of your question, it can also be answered by what is the quantity of which we're talking about? If it's one or two items that we have to manufacture, I might be tooled for it and I can make it happen. It's not a big deal. Now, if I have to manufacture 5,000, 10,000, my quantities really ramp up and we don't really hit the print, then all of that relationship, all of that tribal knowledge, it's going to go out the window, because you're being judged based on the item vis-a-vis the print. So yeah, there's a lot of technology that we can bring into these small businesses once we get past the hurdle of, the relationship and that tribal knowledge. And this is the way we've always done it.
In the industry right now, it's a little bit like a camel hump, right? It's a bimodal. There's like a new generation that's coming in interested in working.
Yep.
And then there's an older generation kind of on their way out, but there's very little kind of bridging that in the middle. How do you solve that? How do you transfer that knowledge effectively without having to just basically restart every relationship and resolve everything over and over again?
Documentation. I think documentation and
people don't like writing stuff down.
No, it doesn't have to be written down. It just has to be preserved. Right.
What do you mean by that?
So, for example, one of the biggest reasons we wanted to partner up with you guys was Fulcrum, was that there was a great method for capturing data. And that capturing technique can be as simple as scanning in a document that has some handwritten notes on it. It could be as simple as taking pictures and scanning in things, creating bills of material that are maybe from a legacy perspective never really properly documented. But just having that ability to capture what we purchased, making it part of that bill of material, that kind of helps bridge the gap of first generation to second generation and what happens in between, right, in that gap period of time. So data collection, I think, is very, very important. Simple things like knowing where items are purchased. Like, did I buy it from McMaster? Did I buy it from MSC? Did I have a local shop make this for me? So capturing the data that would have historically been considered tribal knowledge, in my mind, is imperative.
You need someone that has a kind of a hybrid set of skills to make sure it's done right and to enforce it, right? You need someone who's mechanically minded enough to even know that this makes sense. Someone who's diligent enough and a little bit, OCD about things to make sure that things are organized correctly. And someone who understands that relational part of it, that relationship with the customer, to decipher, is this really right? Or is it just, like you said earlier, to the print, or is it really what we need to do?
Yeah.
Who is that?
That's a really great question, because, I don't know if the term, I'm trying to think of a way to say it diplomatically. Okay. But there's always one guy in the shop that knows everything. And, some people use the term shop rat or whatever the case may be. Right. But there's always that one person that has a handle on things because they've done it. They've experienced it. They've been part of this development with the customer or with a vendor, whatever the case may be. So there's always that one person. And that, in my mind, for small companies is probably one of the biggest Achilles heels, is having that one individual who knows everything, yet nothing is documented.
Sometimes that person doesn't want to relinquish that kind of ownership over the information, right?
So personally experienced that, been there, done that.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, and you can only as a small business owner, I think tolerate so much of that before what you would consider to be mission critical information is not shared. And at that point in time, that comes back to that hard question of, is this one individual worth the bother?
Well, sometimes they're so mission critical, it's not just a short-term little dip that you have to weather through. It could be business ending sometimes, right?
Yeah, it absolutely can be. It's one of those case-by-case scenarios where I think the management team has to determine, am I willing to put the time and energy and effort into, trying to extract the information from one individual versus just starting from scratch and recreating drawings and, spending the time and money into working with different engineer, a different vendor, a different purchasing person, and being able to document that data. I think that my personal opinion is that it has value. So succession planning, we're talking about passing it down to a family member, selling the business, being acquired by somebody. It all has value because that's the know-how that drives efficiency within the business that ultimately leads to either profitability or to at least taking care of customers' needs, driving home the need for data collection, as we were talking earlier, from receiving all the way through production. I look at it even in its more infantile stage, which is purchasing, and being able to drive purchasing to materials showing up to receiving and starting the data collection at that point. And I think that's where I personally need to get better, and drive the need for this data acquisition in A.G. Miller so that things that we do become repeatable, become automatic. So we're not looking for nuts and bolts and fasteners and, that 50-cent PEM that's going to slow down a job. And that, I think, is part of extracting the data from, the generation that was before us and doing it in such a way that's not threatening, because that's not our intent. It's never my intent anyways, to, try to threaten someone with, hey, give me all your information so I can replace you. That's not, I don't think that's the ethical way to do things. I don't think it's the right way to do things.
So embedded in this is kind of two opposing things, right? Like, do you have a framework in your mind about how do you decide when to really understand how it was done before and repeat it versus when to come up with a new solution from scratch because the old way might not be the right way? Both are true sometimes, right? Sometimes it really is shooting yourself in the foot if you try to, fix something that you reinvent the wheel that doesn't need to be reinvented. But other times people can go down the other path where things need to change, but they're stuck in their old ways as well.
Well, I think to a certain extent, you need to have a little bit of a strategy. You need to have a goal in mind. You need to have an end point that you want to navigate to. That could be on-time delivery. That could be revenue. It could be an operating margin. And then from there, you got to have to work backwards to determine, well, can I get there with this wheel or do I need a different wheel? Right. And I think as a business leader, you have to have a strategy in place, and it becomes really, really difficult to execute that strategy when you can't communicate the strategy. You can't afford to get to the strategy or to execute that strategy when you don't have the right customer base to get there. So I think, to answer your question directly, the value of the wheel or the suitability of that wheel becomes a function of my end game. Where do I want to get?
Which in and of itself is a preference. It's a choice. A different person buying A.G. Miller may come up with a very different strategy based on what they want and what they see and what they understand. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people mix up strategy and plan, and they're very different. But how do you make sure that the decisions and the preferences that you have on the strategy you're choosing are the right ones?
Well, that's a good question. Part of, I think, basically validating the strategy, validating where you're trying to go, has to be part of either a very strong leader who is happy to, in a very dictatorial way, point out all the different tactics and steps we're going to take to get there, which may work for somebody. An Elon Musk, for example. I never met the guy, but he seems to have that persona, that way of doing things. And Lord only knows it's worked for him. It would never work for me. I think part of that has to play in with who you are as a person, your ideology of how to run a business, your beliefs, and how to get a team motivated to fundamentally attack the strategy, the end goal. So I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all answer. I can only say that from my perspective, management by communism. That's how I was it was said that that's how I manage. I manage by communism. And I don't think of it that way. I think of it as managing by teamwork. If we all agree we're going to be able to effectively get to this point, let's figure out collectively our roles, our responsibilities. Each one of us has our own mission. And you're going to do your job to the best of your ability to get to the goal that we have collectively agreed that we're going to get to. And if at some point in time, you don't feel like you want to continue to do that, that's okay. We'll have a conversation about where do you fit in and how are we going to collectively do this? Or again, it gets to the point where we're not really working as a team. So we have to be like the NFL, right? And make some trades and put some people out there on free agency and kind of evolve to this group of people that believe in the end game and the tactics that we're going to use to get there.
I mean, I think that's an important distinction. Collectivism, not communism, right? It's really dangerous though, right? One of the first lessons that I learned in managing people or leading, and a lot of people that I know are learning or have learned, is that managing by consensus is extremely dangerous and never works. And when you first take charge of something, fear of failure, whatever the motivation is, can almost always end up expressing itself as trying to seek consensus. Mm-hmm. How do you make sure that you're behaving collectivistly, which is very important, and making sure everyone's brought along, versus trying to seek consensus? Because it can look like the same thing.
That's really hard, right? That's really hard. And trying to gain consensus, you have to be able to see through the folks that are just going to say, yes, I agree, but at the end of the day, their actions don't support their agreement. So trying to get there by consensus is never going to work. It's tricky. So at the end of the day, I think that you have to look at each individual person that you're working with and ask the question, are your actions supporting all the head nodding that you did in our meetings when we were talking about strategy and to a certain extent tactics? Because fundamentally, if people aren't really holding up their end of the bargain and doing what they said they were going to do, then you have to very constructively, in my mind, lead, get people to change their behavior, get them to maybe understand what you were trying to convey and get them to participate in that of their own, right? To really buy in. And if you can't get there, then doesn't matter how much you love the people you're working with. If you personally are bought into that, you might have to make a change or reassign somebody to a different task that they're more comfortable in doing.
Do you think that skill is nature or nurture? Being able to not seek approval I think
it's got to be part of your nature. It's got to be part of your nature, and then you have to continually nurture that.
When you select leaders or promote people or look for new managers from the outside, are you looking for that trait?
Which trait specifically?
The ability to not seek consensus, to not seek approval. Or are there other things that are more important?
I guess I'm going to look at it this way. In a small company, right, whose approval are you seeking, right? If you're seeking the approval of the person that you report to and that who ultimately reports up to the owner of the company or the chairman, the president of the company, then that would be fine because, ultimately I would assume that you're trying to all get to that end game, the execution of that strategy. So going back to the recruiting and hiring, I look for people that if I feel that they are first and foremost a wonderful human being, somebody that is going to be supportive of their colleagues, their boss, third shift janitor, doesn't really matter who that person is. If they're supportive of these other individuals and they're good people, A lot of skill sets we can coach, we can train. If we're starting with an individual who may be really, really talented, but isn't going to fit, then man, you got to really make a decision on how bad do you need that technical skill versus the cohesiveness in the team. And, maybe that individual, you have a very open conversation with them. You're like, dude, you're going to be great at your job, but I don't know if you're going to fit. Right. So now we have to have a different conversation about the value of this individual in the organization. I will be the first to say that I suck at hiring people. I just, I look at people sometime and I think that they're going to do a great job, and they've sold me on their skill set, and they've sold me on their teamwork and their work ethic. And I got sold a bill of goods. And I think that there are people that do a very, very good job in hiring. And I'm just not one of those people. So I have to rely on other people to help me make a decision. And I think part of being successful in business is knowing your weaknesses. Like, I know I don't do a really good job in hiring. I try to hire fast, and sometimes that'll bite me. And sometimes I let people stay in position too long, so I fire slow. And that's not good either. So, but I've learned, right? I've learned that to spot things and just kind of plot this trajectory in my head. Is this person going to work out? Was I sold a bill of goods? So I've gotten better at firing fast.
What's the emotion that prevents you from firing faster? Is it optimism? Is it something else entirely?
So that's a great question. And I remember when I was a young manager for that other company, the big one, and we had to do layoffs. And I will tell you, I was distraught. I was distraught at the thought of sending a guy home or a girl home who has 3 kids, a wife, a mortgage, a truck payment, and I was going to be ending their employment with us. I was physically ill over that. And I guess as I've matured and come to understand it, there are certain priorities that you have to set for the business. First and foremost is you have to make money so that you can take care of everybody else.
Yeah.
But as a younger person, it just wasn't as obvious to me. So that was one of the things that prevented me from emotions, from firing fast, worrying about a person's state, and trying to keep them aboard and keep them along. And hopefully this optimism, that they will come along when it's just the wrong thing to do. So I think part of that is for people that are very social like myself, it's a hard thing to do, to fire fast, because part of it is a reflection of your ability to hire, right? So you just brought this person on, now you're going to fire them. But geez, you made a really bad decision in hiring. You should have done a better decision, made a better decision, done more upfront research, done more screening, asked more questions. So I think that that's part of it. And I'm speaking of myself. And I could probably say that some other managers, other business owners will fall into that same trap of trying to be a good person and having a slightly out of balance perspective of the bigger picture for the business.
How do you think about transferring these types of learnings to the next generation? You're part of that hump too, right? You got a lot of stuff that you've gathered over all these years. How do you think about transferring that knowledge to somebody else?
So I look at it that it shouldn't be a data dump. It should be a constant trickle, talking to people about, whether it's a customer, talking to them about efficiency, talking to them about trends in industry and why things may need to change. So, if you look at me as one of those guys that are in that age group where information will need to be transferred soon, I like to think that I'm memorializing data in our systems so that the data is available and that transfer of knowledge can be more direct. It can be more efficient. And, my perspective is that if I were to get hit by a bus, somebody else could come in and take care of the business. Vis-a-vis what I've left in records, the relationship part's always tough, right? But if you've got a strong number 2, number 3, a strong cadre, your need to have to transition data at a very rapid pace should never exist. There should always be systems, there should always be people that are able to transition and take the business forward.
We have this, framework internally where we talk about how over the last 30 years, we've done a lot of work as a civilization, improving the mechanical muscles of manufacturing. You have a 8 kilowatt laser out there or something like that.
It's a 6 kilowatt that I purchased with the company.
It probably spits out parts 10, 15 times faster than a 50 watt laser that probably was a standard 15 years ago, right?
Yeah, right.
And that now the bottleneck is mechanical mind, decision making, planning, organization. How do you think about that? Do you think that that's going to be easier, harder? Do you think that that's already been happening? Do you think we're lagging behind? There's this huge push to reshore manufacturing. We're trying to assist it with tariffs. We have demand for data centers and for nuclear fusion and all these different things that actually require a lot of sheet metal fabrication.
Yeah.
And we're bottlenecked and we can't fulfill it locally. Like, I know that's a really vague and kind of sprawling question, but what are your thoughts on all that?
So you started your question, you pointed out to a very specific machine, right? And I think that our ability to create stopgaps in human capability, in human availability, in human training is all starting to take place and has started to take place for the last 10 years. So, if we look at just our ability to automate the bending of metal and the programming of robots to bend metal, the programming of robots to weld metal, to do sanding, to do so much of what we considered to be, at one point in time, incredibly costly. The rate at which prices are falling for some of this equipment makes the process of automation a possibility for small shops like us. Like, we have a robotic welder, right? Do we use it to its fullest? No, we do not.
But you're saying that 10 years ago, you couldn't even afford one.
Couldn't afford it. Couldn't come up with a concept, a case of why, a 35-person shop would ever have a robotic welder. Because it was not fathomable that you could spend so little money to have that much capability and flexibility. So as people in the sheet metal industry, like the big companies, like the Amadas of the world, continue to evolve and make product that helps us, it really is, in my mind, it's a stopgap for lack of human resources. People that are just going to come in and do this work and do it as efficiently and not take a day off and not miss work because of, some social reason. So I think that as the industry continues to evolve and the quality of what's being produced to assist sheet metal manufacturers, and that continues to evolve and become affordable, there's going to be a huge change in what these businesses look like. And it'll probably happen in the next less than 10 years.
Within your career?
It's going to be a tough one to answer because, I'm 57. If I stayed a full Social Security, 67.
Could be older in the future.
It could be older in the future. In the next 10 years, I've put in some systems and some equipment that can be run by people who don't have 20 years of sheet metal fabrication experience. And, we can adjust our bend radiuses and come up with parts that are pretty damn good. And you're on the job, 2 days. So the sophistication of what we are buying today is way different than even 10 years ago in the sophistication of what we purchased 10 years ago.
Do you think of that as more of an opportunity that more people can participate in this type of work? Or do you see that as potentially dangerous and commoditization in that there's less differentiation when many more people of less sophistication could go buy this machine and produce the same kind of parts?
So I think what it could do
That's a false dichotomy. It could be some other reason too, or some other outcome.
Well,
too,
I
right?
think that OEMs could very easily invest in equipment to make parts for themselves that they would have never, that they could rationalize why they would make this investment. Mm-hmm. So I think that the risk of work coming in-house is very real. I think that the vertical integration could be very real for a lot of the people that we currently serve, a lot of the industries that we serve. I think it's very real. I mean, so somebody doesn't want to get involved in welding, right? Because they don't want to find welders. They don't have the certifications. Young people don't want to become welders. So there's a scarcity. Yet company X requires welding and they're just not getting what they need in the open market. So they're going to insource. They're going to buy a couple robots. They're going to make a relatively small investment, maybe one or two people to manage these robots, to program them, to take care of them, to change wire, to fix them when a wire gets stuck in a MIG welder. So I think that as technology increases or improves, that there is the possibility that we see less hands in shops like A.G. Miller. I think it's real.
What haven't we covered? We've bounced around all over the place. What other thoughts?
We haven't talked enough about your product.
Well, this is about you, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
No. So, you asked the question, and I think what brought us together was the technology available in software to help small shops become a lot more organized. I don't want to say systems driven because I don't think that, 35 people really need tons of systems to drive them. But the organization, the quality of the data that we can extract has become a lot more affordable.
Well, what we see is a few things that occurred that are somewhat disconnected but kind of connected. The first is that very, very measurably, the dollars per employee in a manufacturer, CNC shop, sheet metal fabricator, has gone up by about 8x over the last 30 years. You would have been a really well-functioning shop if you hit $90,000, $100,000 of revenue per employee back in 1989, 1990. Now we see shops that are really automated doing even short-run work of $300,000, $400,000 of revenue per employee. And there's ones that that they have that capacity. Maybe they don't have that work right now. And one thing that we realize accidentally without really predicting it is that that's a good thing, but it's also really difficult. Each human is now in charge of that much more information. They're just doing so much more. It used to be that you would turret punch and press brake one part over and over again for 3 weeks on end. Now you're working on 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 jobs in a week potentially.
Oh, absolutely.
And so we found that there's some breaking point at some point in time where the humans, even if we can automate the machines more, they just can't hold all that information in their head, and the community of humans can't do that either. We also see there's a huge need for these types of systems, but there's a ton of companies that have started that are really smart Stanford grads, worked at Google or NASA or whatever it may be, and try to write software for manufacturers, and they fail, mostly because there's actually a huge amount of information that's really valuable on your shop floor. We also see some companies that build software for themselves and have a hard time commercializing it because they don't really understand technology. They understand their shops and they can say this is what we need, but they don't really even understand what's possible with software. And so they don't design the right thing or it's not scalable. So for us, one of the biggest secrets is having people that are technologists, but with the humility to say we are not manufacturers and there's something really important going on here, and to come on site and extract as much information as possible and have it guide us, not to build what our customers say, build this, that almost never works, but to really start with what you're trying to achieve and work backwards. Really long-winded, but what advice would you have for companies like ours that are trying to take people that are really smart technologists but existentially need to learn about how you do business. What's advice for us to work with you guys better to extract the right gems from these conversations and experiences?
Understand the pain points. Really understand what is difficult for small manufacturers, whether it be production planning, whether it be procurement, whether it be development of routers, and try to work with us in such a way that you give us visibility into solutions for questions we may not even be able to ask at a certain point. So if you just break down what we do and how we do it, and having a different skill set, a different level of tech savvy and understanding of what is possible with coding and with software, bring us solutions to stuff that we haven't even thought about yet, and work with us to try to ferret out what may be a better solution to tribal practices. You guys are so outside of my league from a tech savvy perspective that it's embarrassing for me to try to tell you what you should be doing next. Do the things that are basic. Listen to your customers. Try to get ahead of them with technology. Try to create solutions that can be adopted, that are adoptable, and try to do it all in a fairly cost-effective scale so that it's affordable. And I think that you guys are doing those things. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation because I couldn't afford it. And then have that one guy or girl or person who is willing to listen to us when we get jammed up and try to come up with some solutions, whether it be a bug or just a process improvement. So basically what I'm telling you is just keep doing what I think Fulcrum is doing right now. I think you guys are doing a great job, and be present. Like we're going to have a chance to chat tonight, right? And you may ask me a question that I hadn't even thought of, because you have the ability to talk to so many of us, me, that I don't have the ability to do, to really kind of aggregate all these pain points and come up with these themes and provide specific solutions that we're going to want to spend our hard-earned dollars on to make us better. Because fundamentally, all you're trying to do is make us better.
Right.
So, could we run this business without software? Absolutely, we could. We really could do it. And for many, many years, this company was very successful doing it without, the state-of-the-art software. So to a certain extent, we don't know the questions to even ask ourselves at times. But you guys are really good at coming together with a bunch of different manufacturers and coming up with these themes and these solutions to problems that we otherwise wouldn't really have a good way to solve. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I appreciate you spending time with me and sharing your story.
It's fun.
If people want to ask you questions, want to give you work, how do they get a hold of you?
So my email is Lou, that's LOU @agmiller.com. I would love to hear from other shop owners. Would love to get some more work. You can also feel free to send me a text, 607-279-2138. I'm happy to text, call, chat. I don't have all the answers, but I'd love to talk to more of my, people in my situation that are still trying to grow their businesses and, do a good job for their employees and their customers.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.